Fantastic. Well, thank you, Mikhail, for inviting me to this awesome place here in Cannes. What a great setting. I'm coming from San Francisco, kind of land of technology, and I've been immersed in the AI, generative AI kind of boom here for the last year. But what I'm not, Mikhail doesn't want me to really talk about the AI so much, except in a larger context. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is essentially a broader sense of what could happen in the next 25 years that would be more in line in terms of the schema, you could say, of this conference, in a more pro-tech, how new technologies will lead to greater growth, but growth that is turning the corner, helping turn the corner on climate change, and ultimately to kind of lead us into an era of great progress, essentially, that will actually, which has countered a lot of the gloom and doom that's out there today. Now, this is basically rooted in a new magazine article I did last fall, which was extremely well received. You can get it online, just Google for the thing. 10,000-word piece, where I was asked to think about the next 25 years and to counter the kind of gloom and doom story of how we're lost, we can't get anywhere, but in fact to think through and actually lay out what I do think can happen, and in fact, I actually think will happen, and to make the case for a much more positive kind of opening up of what could happen in the next 25 years, what I kind of deemed an era of the great progression. Now, one of the things that actually, or one of the core arguments of what's going on here is that the next 25 years, we're going to see 3 world historical technologies roll out in parallel, basically. The first one is, in fact, AI. We are going through, humans are taking a step change in our capabilities. We are getting augmented with an absolutely powerful new tool, and that we will see this going on literally for centuries. The second world is we're basically entering an era of clean energies, an array of clean energies, but in fact, including potentially fusion energy here. But again, is a world historical step change in human capability that's going to keep going for a long time to come. And the third one is bioengineering, which is essentially, we are now going to essentially be able to engineer all living things, and that could actually be used in many ways to kind of evolve us towards a much more sustainable kind of technologies over time. We're going to talk about all 3 in time now here, in as fast as we can go here. Now, to think about that, the reason I use this is actually saying we're entering an AI age. The AI age begins. And when I say age, it's like when humans got to the point of the Iron Age, we essentially said, we can use metal. From that point on, humans started using metal and kept going up that way. Think of the same way. All 3 of these technologies, world historic technologies, are opening up a new age of human beings. Up until this time, humans had no ability, anything to do with intelligence, had to have a human mind applied to it. Now we are, for the first time in our history, we are now going to be working with intelligent machines. And this is the super early days, that for centuries, no, we're going to keep playing this game. We won't go back, barring some kind of crazy disaster. The same thing is we're on the verge, we are in the middle of the beginnings of, essentially the age of clean energy. It's happening with renewables now in much ways. We're going to touch on that really fast. But ultimately, from this time forward, we are going to transition to increasingly clean and essentially abundant energy. Again, a step change. We will not go back. From the campfires to oil extraction, it's all been carbon energy kind of screwing up the planet, but we are now entering the clean energy age that's going to continue for a long time to go. And this is the third one. With our genetic understanding and our biological understanding and be able to manipulate living things, we are entering a bioengineering age. Again, from this point on, humans won't kind of go backwards, but they're going to go forward, barring disaster. So I think we're all of us living through this crazy moment in history, actually, what's happening. Now, on top of that, aside from technology, we're essentially going through a series of fundamental system changes. And so the world that all of us, essentially got used to for the last 40 years, essentially is kind of devolving, essentially falling apart. And this is accounts for a lot of the gloom and doom. So you would have to say, from the Western point of view, for the last 40 years, the kind of Western challenge has been terrorism. Energy has been carbon. Transportation has been all internal combustion. Culture has been dominated by the baby boomers. Politics has been largely conservative. Our economics has been kind of unleashing the private sector. Capitalism has been all about shareholder value. Work has been completely physical, whether it's knowledge work or whatever. Production has always continued to be industrial. And geopolitics was focused on the Middle East because you had to keep the oil going to keep the whole flywheel going. I'm making the argument that that whole world is on that side and falling apart fast. Now, if you're in that world, the world looks really bad, and you start really getting freaked out. But what's fantastic about what's happening is in every one of these categories, we see a new model, a new system emerging, which isn't quite totally clear, but it's starting to actually rapidly kind of cohere now. Now, for this era that you can think of the next 40 years or beyond even, we see our meta challenge, of course, is climate, as we basically pointed out. But all kinds of things are shifting too. Energy is rapidly going to clean. Transportation rapidly going to electric. Culture much more dominated by the millennials. Politics, I would argue, we don't have enough time here to get into it, is going to increasingly go more progressive. You're looking in economics, much more about industrial policy, government sector. We're watching capitalism get more distributed into all kinds of stakeholders. We're watching work becoming virtual with the jump start of the pandemic. Production is going to become more biological through synthetic biology. Geopolitics from the Western point is moving much more into Asia, China, and all the different big population centers out there. And so that is the entire new system that's being born here. And we just happen to be living in the 10 years that we are watching this fundamental system change across all these things. You could say from one meta system to another meta system. This is essentially the reason we see so much confusion and so much doubt and so much anxiety about what's happening. Now, at the core is climate change, but I want to make the point from the green growth point of view, just make a couple points as I kind of move here fast through my material. The first thing is what we are up against. This is CO2 since the point of human beings with our brains and bodies came out about here. And these are the kind of this is kind of ice ages, but we have never seen anything close to this amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And it is going in a direction like this. Now, this can't just be, hey, let's slow down a little bit. We have to do something dramatically different. It turns out that if you take all from the Industrial Revolution, CO2 and which regions are responsible for it, what is fascinating is that by the 80s, the kind of CO2 in the atmosphere from the United States and Europe, the more sophisticated developed economies, has essentially flattened, and in fact is even coming down despite growth. Where the actual boom has been coming is the underdeveloped economies been catching up with growth on basically coal and others, but in fact, China already is getting more in this kind of capacity. So there is a way forward if we can transition to more cleaner technologies and higher efficiency of the economy. And so that is what we're seeing through all the COP and all the UN kind of discussions is how do we drive that thing down? Now, you could drive it down, I guess, through kind of changing human habits and political systems and all, but I would argue we have to go full bore ahead on these next cleaner technologies. Now, Mikhail mentioned I did, in the mid-90s, did a similar exercise in the next 25 years to 2020 called The Long Boom. Went into a book, went into multiple languages, spent a lot of time talking about this thing. But what it actually did is it talked about how the technologies of the digital revolution and the knitting together the world of globalization was essentially going to lead to, I would argue, a much better world. Now, it also had 10 things that could go wrong. And this largely happened. Computers got more powerful. People got connected up over the internet. Goofy startups like Amazon became trillion-dollar companies. Many of these things played out by 2020. Also, 10 things that went wrong, we said could get in the way of this thing. Actually, they actually came about. But the thing that's extraordinary, these were the things that we predicted in the mid-90s, that we'll probably see these things happening to slow down or complicate this transition, including, by the way, I love this one, modern plague kills millions. That was bang on. Pretty much all these happened. But they didn't stop the overarching technology transformation. And that's the key thing. What we were basically playing on, which I can play on here, is essentially a key thing in predicting the future or understanding the future. And that's the classic technology adoption curve, which many of you here know by heart. But the key thing is to remember the tipping point. Understanding the tipping point of these technologies is absolutely crucial. Why? Because tipping points before this time, you think, this solar stuff's not going to work. And then once it happens and it goes exponential, you go, oh my God, that thing is just going to take off in a way. This is the key insight in understanding how new technologies are going to play out. The second thing is the mindset of everybody is always rooted in the old way of doing things. Those internal combustion cars, that's the way it's going to be. Until you get a new technology, enough people adopt it, and then boom, it is so superior that everyone shifts. This is a classic paradigm shift thing. I'm arguing going forward, we are absolutely in this paradigm shift, and we're also at the tipping point across many of these things. And you can see this in the early statistics around clean energy, for example. Because what's happened, just like digital technologies, the costs in the last 40 years of solar power has just dramatically dropped. And because of that, if we had the time, we'd go a little slower, but I'm just going to move fast. The adoption has started the hockey stick up. And what's starting to happen now is you're watching how global finance is now over $1.2 trillion in private money, not government money, has gone in just last year into all things green. This is the auto industry. This is the solar industry. We are watching the hockey stick of global capital moving. And ultimately, here's one of many different charts. This goes back to the 60s. If you take energy from the nuclear industry and energy from the non-hydro renewables, we're watching, this is wind and solar. This is absolutely taking off. And so which of these trajectories would you want for clean energy going forward? You'd want the one that's going off the charts like this. This is going to be, now, will it solve everything? Not everything. We do have to kind of move into some other kind of energy sources, but we're well on our way. Same thing with electric. And this has just happened in the last few years. Why did electric come down? The cost of lithium batteries came dramatically down. Basically, watch the global uptake. Now it's 10% globally of all new cars are essentially fully electric. And so you start to watch how going out to 2040, the different Europe and China, by the way, are leading the way on this. But you can totally see how this is going to happen. The takeoff is happening across the world. Every major car company now is involved. And you can watch throttling back the internal combustion engine. These are just different ways to happen. This is a classic technology transition moment. It's just that we're at the beginning of it and hard to see the end. It's coming. And over this next 25 years will absolutely happen. Now, this gets into growth. What drives long-term growth is essentially fundamentally new technologies, create new industries, create new wealth, create new jobs. This has been totally historically has happened over and over and over again. And so if you take those three basically world historic technologies that are rolling out at the same time, I just went over the evidence of this one, take it off. Let's do a touch on the AI version. Now, AI essentially explodes. Why now? Because generative opens it up to everybody, all entrepreneurs, all kinds of people. This has been if you've been in the Valley for the last 5 years, AI has been kind of chugging along, but it's just been behind closed doors. Boom, this blows it open. Where does it blow it up, I would say, the most? I'd say San Francisco, just when everyone starts saying, everyone's leaving San Francisco. Absolutely not. It's going crazy. You should absolutely check in there. But again, we're talking about this tomorrow. But I want to say I've been running a series of gatherings of experts in AI in San Francisco for this last year here. And I've kind of been grappling with these big questions with some of the world's experts in AI, and we're actually seeing, the implications in business is absolutely clear. I don't have to convince you folks there. But the thing that I think is missing in the general is the positive possibilities of AI are kind of mind-blowing. In fact, I've had plenty of economists say we could probably double the productivity of all knowledge workers within the next couple years. And that idea of what are the limits of growth of a developed economy could actually be underestimated now. That we could actually actually watch developed economies grow at higher rates than the roughly 2% it usually goes. Same thing with education. If you had individual tutors for elementary school, even into higher education, you could watch essentially the cost of education come down quite dramatically. Now, there are issues, and maybe tomorrow we'll be talking a lot about them. But from my point of view in the conversations I've been having, these are manageable risks that basically happen with any general purpose technology, electricity, all on. You always have downsides and things to navigate. Humans have always done it. We will do it again. Not enough to shut down the incredible positive side of this. Now, I will say, my only few thoughts on this is essentially watch out for any area that has been essentially immune from automation up till now. And if you look at the costs here of anything to do with just human intelligence and not using automation, all of them have gone up fundamentally in the last 20 years. All of these are now susceptible to essentially applied machine intelligence. That's one thing I think is going to start to hit. I would argue AI is mostly going to augment human capability. This is a complicated chart, but the only thing I would point is this is from Goldman Sachs. Lawyers and executive assistants are the two categories they think of real displacement. Most of this is the blue, is augmentation and higher productivity. And the red, by the way, are physical jobs like construction and maintenance, things like that that probably won't be automated. But the general point is it's going to be a productivity great boost to the things. And the final thing I think I would say, and leave the rest of AI for later, for tomorrow, is we are underestimating the acceleration of innovation that AI is going to provide us. And I'll give you just one example. Right now, the only way, essentially, innovation in business and all over the world is essentially dominated by, here we are speaking English in France. Essentially, the kind of native English speakers are not even 500 million people. And these are the languages all over the world that are the native speakers. Simultaneous language translation is going to be the fluid, natural norm. I know we have human translators here. That is going to just be ubiquitous this decade. And so you're going to open up channels of innovation, and also between classes. Instead of having a college education and speaking English, we're going to actually watch an entire world unleash innovative potential this decade in ways that can kind of take on these challenges. Third area, briefly, because I don't have a ton of time, is to just remind people that the slowest to move and the potentially the largest impact is coming in bioengineering. And this is another thing that people do not probably fully understand, is when we started with cracking the first human genome, it cost us $2 to $3 billion and took 15 years. By 2020, the number had come down to $1,000 to crack anybody's, decode anybody's genome, and now it's getting close to about $100. This decade, it's going to be $100 for anybody all over the world to do this. That is twice as fast as the doubling of our computer power and the dropping of costs of computers. Second thing is, essentially, we're understanding through CRISPR how to basically manipulate the biology. That happened right around here. This is investment in biotech startups. And once people started understanding what was happening and how powerful this is going to be, this is a proxy for what's coming in the next decade here. But I wanted to say, we're just beginning this era of synthetic biology, human engineering of all living things, materials and animals, and potentially ourselves, which gets a little kind of touchy. But the reason to say this could be a kind of an unbelievable aid into building the sustainable everything. Instead of plastic bottles out of petrochemicals, many entrepreneurs now are working on how do you get packaging that essentially biodegrades with exposure to salt water or essentially exposure to UV light for 2 weeks in a desert. There are all kinds of ways we could re-engineer products and all kinds of things that would be more in sync over time with essentially living on this planet with the kind of limited sources we have. Now, one example is just meat production. Meat is horrible, beef particularly, on the environment. But we're already seeing with cultured meat, where you take the cell of a cow, put it in a vat, give it the amino acids and the kind of nutrients it needs, and you grow, essentially technologically, the exact same beef that tastes just like beef and in fact now be able to use in hamburgers. Now you'll still have your real cut of beef here in 2020 that if you really want for here, but eventually we're watching essentially the possibility that many of the things that are complicating our agricultural system, our food systems, could actually evolve technologically as well. Now I'm going to kind of end here with this idea of this. People might be underestimating that we could be entering a new era of abundance, a different era of abundance. And what I mean by this is all three of these technologies could make such a dramatic impact on what we can do, what humans can do, that the cost of a lot of things that we're used to could shift. And actually you could watch more cheaper things go to more people, and we could bring many people over the world on much more clean or kind of green technologies. And I'll just give you one example, which is a little complicated because you can go into a bunch of ways how this would affect, AI would affect, bring costs down in education, all kinds of things. But what I just want to mention is every city on the planet is constrained now by affordable housing. Nobody has enough affordable housing. Why? Individual car ownership. 1/3 of all cities is jammed with individual cars that are used only 5% of the time. They're sitting on the side of the street. They have to have a parking lot. They have all kinds of things. I would expect, it's hard to predict exactly how this will play out, but autonomous vehicles could be used, shared autonomous vehicles, to claim back up to 1/3 of all major cities. In the US, Europe, Jakarta, Mexico City, every one of these cities is kind of just choked with that traffic now. And you can imagine a much different way that instead of that 95% not being used in somebody's driveway, it's actually moving all over the place. Now again, that's a kind of a secondary effect of like autonomous vehicles, which, by the way, are absolutely happening in the next 25 years. In fact, they're already starting in San Francisco. You can get taxis now with them. Energy. The function of every civilization is a function of how abundant and cheap is your energy. And it is possible now that we're starting to move into an energy abundant era. Now, this is a simple way to think about this. This is my house, my solar panels with my battery and my electric car in California. I don't care now about using energy. I can leave lights on. I can drive anywhere because it's taking all my energy from the sun, has no kind of bad impact on the environment through internal combustion. And so I don't care about energy. I can use energy as much as I want. It's limitless. For the next 30 years, it's paid for and limitless. Now, I'm just giving you as a little shift of like how we think about energy. Ultimately, I think in the next 25 years, we're also going to see the commercial availability of fusion energy. Oops, sorry, I already moved that fast. But if we get to that, and that's one of these, let's see if it happens, but then you're talking about incredibly cheap, incredibly abundant, incredibly reliable, essentially energy, which could well happen here. Not a promise there. And the last final thing I'll just mention is with biotech, things that are very expensive now, healthcare, and others. You could imagine if you understood the genetic makeup of everybody and you understand the biological processes of everyone and you had AI regulating cheaply everybody and actually acting as a daily doctor for you, it could actually bring down the cost of healthcare and if actually lead to much more healthy lives. Again, with no kind of damage to the environment. So there's a lot of these new technologies could have crazy, a second wave of abundance that we've never really had before. And so the only thing I would just end with here, fast, given my time, everything has to be fast here, but I want to just stress that it's not just the developed economies in the world. And this gets to kind of the degrowth thing I think we got to think about. Is essentially starting in the 80s, it wasn't just the new technologies, but essentially the globalization of the world. This is the trade going off, kicking off since 1980. This is level of trade. This is people traveling. When I was a college kid, nobody was traveling across country borders, and now it's like 1.5 billion people running around all the time. Essentially, crazy knitting people together with human beings communicating. And this is essentially the kind of the lifestyles, essentially the GDP per capita in China, East Asia, South Asia. All these people were lifted out of extreme poverty into the global economy. And in fact, when you look just in our period of 40 years here, if you go back, this is all people for most of history, everybody lived in extreme poverty. That's $2 a day or less. Basically, as late as 1980, 40% of the planet was in that. This is China bringing all their people back. We're down to about 11%. Now, can we stop that? No, we have to bring everybody out of that kind of extreme poverty. And so I would just kind of point out that there are some inexorable things going to happen in the next 25 years, meaning they're going to happen one way or the other. It's just playing out here, that are going to help us with climate and help bring those people up all over the world. One is we're going to move everybody into cities. For all of human history, up until 2010, there were more people out roaming around in rural areas than in urban. That changed then. And looking forward, 25 years to 2050, this is pretty much expected that we'll pretty much have 70 to 75, potentially 80% of the world will be in cities the next 25 years. Now that's good, because when you bring people off that, the second thing is, so you got people in cities, which is a load off the kind of environment. The second thing is the global middle class. Oops, let me just put in one thing. Global middle class is anyone who has a scooter, an air conditioner, a refrigerator, and a little pocket money to put their kid in school. And who's going to deny that to anyone on the planet? It turns out we already have half the world is at that level now, partly because of the last 40 years. It's now expected, with growth, we could actually get about another 1.7 billion people into that global middle class category. By the way, anybody in our middle class is rich by any standards. And so we're going to potentially could grow this a little bit, but we could move a lot of people out of that extreme poverty. The second thing, final thing, is that when you do that for women, essentially we bring the population rates down. Women in cities working in middle class environments have lower birth rates. We are watching that all over the world. It's coming, this is the West kind of happen. It's happening all over the world, and we expect to do that. We need fewer people on the planet. We're turning the corner. It's all going to work. And with that, I would say, the final word, as you say here, I got to go. It's a world historic moment for all, but let's stay positive. We can manage this in other ways, and maybe balance it a little bit with a degrowth strategy too, but I would say let's stick with the plan and pull this off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You did it.